What happens when the world's most powerful military alliance launches a war without a single United Nations mandate, armed not with invasion plans, but with relentless air power? In the spring of 1999, NATO embarked on Operation Allied Force, a 78-day bombing campaign against Yugoslavia, aiming to stop the bloodshed in Kosovo. It was the first major NATO war, the first time the alliance used force against a sovereign state without UN approval, and it set the stage for how the West would wage wars in the 21st century. This isn't just the story of bombs and battle plans, it's the story of clashing politics, controversial strategies, human resilience, and a war that still shapes international law today. Stay tuned as we dive into the gripping history of Operation Allied Force, the war fought from the skies. Part 1. The Road to Kosovo. The Kosovo War didn't begin with NATO jets roaring overhead. It began with centuries of tension. Kosovo, a small province in the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, was ethnically diverse but majority Albanian. To the Serbs, Kosovo was sacred, the cradle of their medieval kingdom and site of the 1389 Battle of Kosovo, etched into national memory. To Kosovar Albanians, however, it was home, where they made up about 90% of the population by the 1990s. Under Yugoslav leader Josip Broz Tito, these tensions were kept in check. But after his death in 1980 and the rise of Slobodan Milošević, Serbian nationalism surged. Milošević stripped Kosovo of autonomy in 1989, igniting resistance movements. By the mid-1990s, the Kosovo Liberation Army, KLA, had emerged, launching guerrilla attacks on Serbian police and officials. Belgrade cracked down with overwhelming force, mass arrests, village burnings, and reports of massacres. To Milošević, the KLA were terrorists. To the west, the Serbian crackdown looked like ethnic cleansing. Fun fact, by 1998, CNN and BBC had dubbed the Kosovo conflict the CNN War, as live footage of burning villages and fleeing refugees galvanized international outrage. Peace talks at Rambouillet in early 1999 failed. Western negotiators demanded Milošević accept NATO troops in Kosovo, something he saw as an attack on Yugoslavia's sovereignty. He refused. And so, on March 24, 1999, NATO launched Operation Allied Force. Part 2. The Strategy of Air Power. Unlike wars in Iraq or Vietnam, NATO made a radical choice: no ground invasion. The strategy was simple: bomb Yugoslavia until Milošević relented. But here's the myth-busting detail. NATO expected this would last just a few days. In reality, it took 78. NATO's force consisted of over 1,000 aircraft from 19 nations, bases stretched across Italy, Germany, and aircraft carriers in the Adriatic. The operation was commanded by General Wesley Clark, with the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe overseeing the campaign. The initial targets? Air defenses, command centers, and infrastructure. But as Serbian forces continued operations in Kosovo, NATO escalated, striking bridges, power plants, factories, and even Belgrade itself. Surprising detail: on May 7, 1999, NATO accidentally bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, killing 3 journalists. Washington called it a tragic mistake. Beijing called it deliberate. Riots erupted in China. This incident nearly derailed U.S.-China relations for years. NATO air campaigns also used cutting-edge technology. This was the first large-scale conflict where precision-guided munitions, so-called smart bombs, took center stage. Roughly 35% of NATO bombs were guided, compared to just 8% in the Gulf War 8 years earlier. Still, accuracy was far from perfect. Civilian targets, like a passenger train on a bridge and a refugee convoy, were tragically hit. Critics accused NATO of waging a war of destruction from the safety of 15,000 feet. Part 3. Yugoslavia's defense. Milošević and his generals faced the most powerful military alliance in history. Yet surprisingly, Yugoslavia's air defenses managed to frustrate NATO. The Yugoslav military used Soviet-era equipment, MiG-29 fighters, SA-3 surface-to-air missiles and radar systems. Outdated, yes, but their tactics were clever. Instead of fighting NATO head-on, they relied on camouflage, mobility, and deception. Fun fact, Yugoslav forces would set up fake tanks made of wood and rubber. NATO wasted expensive precision bombs on these decoys. One post-war study revealed that many of NATO's reported destroyed targets were, in fact, dummies. On March 27, 1999, Yugoslav forces shot down an American F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighter, the first stealth aircraft ever lost in combat. This shocked the world. Supposedly invisible, the jet had been tracked using old radar techniques. To this day, parts of the downed F-117 remain in a Serbian museum, and allegedly, some were shared with Russia and China. Despite these tactical wins, Yugoslavia was strategically cornered. NATO controlled the skies. The country's economy crumbled under sanctions and bombings. Part 4. Politics behind the war. The war wasn't just fought in the skies. It was fought in meeting rooms. For NATO, unity was fragile. Some nations, like the US and Britain, pushed hard for escalation. Others, like Greece, feared destabilization in the Balkans. France and Italy worried about civilian casualties undermining NATO's image. Russia, meanwhile, condemned the bombing as an illegal attack on a sovereign state. Moscow was Serbia's historical ally, and Russian public opinion strongly sided with Belgrade. At one point, Russian volunteers even traveled to Kosovo to fight alongside Serbian forces. Inside Yugoslavia, Milošević portrayed himself as the defender of Serbian honor. State television broadcast images of bomb damage to rally nationalist sentiment. But behind the scenes, the pressure was mounting. The key turning point came when NATO threatened a ground invasion and Russia began signaling it would not intervene militarily. With Kosovo in flames and his regime weakening, Milošević's options narrowed. Part 5. Humanitarian crisis. Perhaps the most tragic part of Operation Allied Force wasn't the bombs, but the refugees. As NATO bombed, Serbian forces accelerated their campaign in Kosovo. Villages were burned, civilians expelled, and mass killings reported. By June 1999, nearly 1 million Kosovar Albanians had fled their homes, one of the largest refugee crises in Europe since World War II. Fun fact, the US actually built emergency refugee camps in Albania and Macedonia in record time, airlifting supplies to house tens of thousands. Journalists called it a humanitarian airlift, parallel to the bombing war. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia later indicted Milošević for war crimes, including crimes against humanity in Kosovo, the first sitting head of state to be charged by such a tribunal. Part 6. The End Game. By June 1999, Yugoslavia was exhausted. Infrastructure lay in ruins. Kosovo was devastated. Under intense pressure, Milošević agreed to withdraw his forces from Kosovo. On June 10, 1999, NATO suspended its bombing. Soon after, KFOR, NATO-led peacekeeping forces, entered Kosovo to secure the province. The outcome? Kosovo became a de facto international protectorate. While still legally part of Yugoslavia, it was administered by the UN. In 2008, Kosovo declared independence, a move Serbia still refuses to recognize. Part 7. Legacy of Operation Allied Force. Operation Allied Force left behind a complex legacy. For NATO, it was both a success and a controversy. It achieved its goal, Serbian withdrawal, without losing a single NATO soldier in combat. Yet, it also raised tough questions. Was bypassing the UN justified? Did bombing campaigns create more civilian suffering than they prevented? Did this set the precedent for future interventions, like Iraq in 2003 or Libya in 2011? For Serbia, the war marked the beginning of Milošević's downfall. By 2000, he was ousted in mass protests. For Kosovo, it paved the way to independence, but also left deep scars, ethnic tensions, economic struggles, and political disputes that continue today. And for international law, the war remains a gray zone. NATO called it a humanitarian intervention. Critics called it illegal. The debate still rages. Can you violate sovereignty to prevent atrocities? Operation Allied Force was more than just a bombing campaign. It was a turning point. The first war waged from the skies, the first NATO war without the UN, and a preview of 21st century interventions. It left behind victory and tragedy, progress and controversy. And it reminds us that in war, even the most advanced technology can't escape the shadows of politics and human suffering. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most debated conflicts, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Share your thoughts below. Was NATO right to intervene? Or did Operation Allied Force cross a dangerous line in international law? Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more immersive history.